the problem with like Nike is it took its finger off the pulse somewhat. And I believe, it puts so much money into the production value of things, and also like the way it shows up. It almost like crowbars its way into every culture. It tries really, really hard. And that try hard, we are so savvy to that these days.
And I find it interesting that like a guy from England chooses to live and work in communications in Germany, which is, one of the European countries where I think their language is very strong. It's a very like business language. So, what is it like switching cultures and then being responsible for thinking about how brands and companies show up in the world outside of a culture that's super familiar to you?
That's a loaded question to start with, but I like it. First of all, you said I chose Germany. I never chose to come here. I came here completely by mistake. Well, can I say by mistake? Coincidentally came here. So, I think I mentioned to you before the internet cut off last time we were talking, that I was working in the UK. I was working in Manchester, and I managed to kind of tick a lot of boxes that I wanted to creatively in my career. And I was working for Bench, the streetwear company, and I was really, really enjoying it. But I knew that I'd kind of missed out a lot. And previous to that, I'd not done as much traveling as I wanted to do, because I was just stuck into work and fixated with design and creativity and trying to follow this path. And I decided to take a little hiatus, a little break, and I packed up my stuff and I jumped on a plane and decided to go backpacking. And my idea was to land in Australia eventually and try and find work there and just kind of like visit some different countries, do some stuff, and be away for maybe 2 years, and then see where it ended. And I think it was about 6 months into that trip, I met a girl on an island who was on holiday, and she happened to be German. No surprise there, right? You can see where this story is going. And then we had like a little bit of a thing, and she decided that, of course, she was coming back to Germany, and she asked me if I would like to come. And I was like, you know what? I can go wherever I want right now. I'm kind of free to make those decisions. And I was like, let's go. And I jumped on a plane and I landed. I was in Thailand at the time. So I went there's a place called Barmbek here, which if anyone knows, in Hamburg, it's quite a little miserable. Well, let's not say miserable. I landed in October, so it was quite grey and miserable. So I went from like the islands in Thailand which was a glorious Technicolor, to sort of this kind of grey, black and white city, which has now become my home. So I got here and I just ended up staying. I never left. When I arrived with a backpack, shorts and flip-flops in the middle of October.
That's very cool. And I mean, obviously it's, brands to certain brands, to a lesser and greater degree, represent sort of culture and people. I know we live in an age where there's lots of globalization, but I think we're also seeing lots of trends of sort of people being more interested in more local, more specific, more niche, more sort of things. What's it like as, I'm going to use the term outsider quite loosely here, but like as someone who's not from Germany, like working in the space of helping people create these cultural artifacts?
Right, so I've been here a while, but let me say, when I first got here, it was absolutely horrendous. It was horrible. When you land in a place where you don't understand the culture, and you don't understand the scene, you don't know where to look, you have to really kind of figure things out. And when I got here, I was really I started looking for work, and a lot of the doors were closed on me because I didn't speak German. Like, how are you going to, talk to people? How are you going to be part of the teams? How are you going to speak with a client? There's no kind of like, there's no way in, and that was really hard at first. And there was a turning point for me where I'd had so many doors on me, and I wasn't being able to be given the opportunities that I was looking for. I felt very, very alienated. And, I come from having a really good career and, having my education in the UK and wanting to do great stuff, and seeing, especially what I did as a universal thing. Brand is a universal language. It can travel. But once you land in a country where English is not the common language or not the mother tongue, then it almost becomes somewhat its own microcosm. It becomes quite inward looking. It doesn't have the same global reach that, how English brands or studios that are actually talking to, certain types of demographics can spread. And I realized that pretty quickly. And I got like a lucky break, which actually opened up the door to me. And it was actually through Subculture. So I've been really big into skateboarding since I was a kid. And I was in an interview with one guy in an agency called Daniel Closer. Big up Daniel for giving me the opportunity. And he saw that I had some skateboards in my portfolio. And he was just like, "Oh, mate, you skate?" I was like, yeah. And then we just started talking. It was like, Win, I'm going to give you a chance because I know you know what you're doing and I love your work, even though it was I think it was for a car company. I think it was for Volkswagen. So skateboarding had nothing on the surface level to do with it. But the fact was that we connected. And yeah, he opened up those doors. And from then I was able to kind of step into the role and also somewhat try and turn my weaknesses as I was kind of experiencing it into a superpower. So I branded myself as a Brit, which is a very strange thing to label, but it was like, okay, how can I be different to everybody else? Okay, maybe I don't speak your language, but I have a different perspective on things. And what we do isn't all visual, you can communicate in many different ways. And that was really important to me, was to kind of show that you can be part of the culture, you can also be an observer, and you can also contribute, even if language, is that initial barrier. Let's break those down. And that has actually been a huge goal and motivation for why I started the studio was to actually try and break down those walls that I think sometimes can be put up because of differences of culture or ideas or background.
I mean, it's fascinating. Like, we work in Europe, we work in the US, we're based in South Africa. I mean, South Africa has 17 national languages. Like, we are a multicultural country. And It's fascinating for me moving into these different spaces. Like, how you conduct yourself in a meeting in London is completely different to how you conduct yourself in a meeting in the US. And the US is even such a huge thing. It's East Coast, there's the kind of the belt in the middle, there's the West Coast. These are all like completely different places. But I think you touched on something really valuable there, where I think an outsider's perspective can be an exceptionally valuable thing, because there's so much taken for granted when you're inside a culture. When you come in with a curious and open mind from outside, you can often see things that people don't feel are special or unique or different or interesting, because they can't see it. It's just that is normal to them. But as the outsider, you're like, wow, this thing here is special. This thing here is. Or the counterpoint to that is you can also come in and go like, well, I see everyone's doing it like this, but in some of the other places I've operated, there's a whole nother paradigm that you can think about this stuff. And it makes for very interesting combinations, very interesting things that might be, like you said, I think very different to what people are used to.
I mean, that's also what's been so unique and fascinating about the relationship between Jan and I. On one hand, he's German. He grew up in East Germany before the wall came down. I'm from a working class background in Yorkshire, and we're now we're here and we're on this journey together. And it's me having those conversations and talking about, well, this is how we would do it, this is how I would approach it, this is how I think. And then you would hit this. It's not necessarily a wall, more like a springboard, or just like a challenging perspective on what your own version of reality is, because of his background, and also, let's put it as like the Germanness or the German side of it. And it's kind of like he compliments me and I compliment him, and then we challenge what's normal to him and we challenge what's normal to me. So I'm also shaped culturally. I think I'm a very different person to how I used to be. I've grown in ways that I never thought I would because of those challenges. I think Jan also has too. So there's this very kind of dynamic relationship that we have, which I think is really unique. And it really, really affects like how we approach work and how we build a culture and the people that we bring into the space, into the studio, and who we want to work with.
That's right. Can you share some of that? Like, how has it shaped your work? Like, what is the actual tangible difference been because of this kind of collaboration and colliding of worlds that's happening?
I'd say adversity. Like, there's an extra layer that you're challenged with. I can give you a really nice example. Like the other day, we were kind of in a chemistry call with a client from the UK who we're now working with. And they came on the call and they said, "Hey guys, you've been recommended. We really like your work. I'm just going to give you like a little kind of overview of the brief." And they said to us, "We want something that is, like your typical kind of brand these days. It's like a quirky kind of tone of voice. It's lighthearted and take itself too seriously. It still has to be, serious as an undertone, so it has to deliver, but it can be fun." And I'm sure you ask these kind of briefs all the time. Mm-hmm. And I could see Jan is kind of nodding, and I'm like, "Yeah, this sounds great. It's exactly what I want to do. Something really, really cool and fun." And then once we finished the call, Jan was like, "No German client ever asks for that." And I think it was just that those two perspectives, like the way that we talk with clients and the expectations here in Germany are really different, like to what you're expected or what the expectations are in other countries. And my kind of measure is the UK, because that's where I get like a lot of my influence from, and also I understand the culture as well. I just think we're geared up a lot more to be challenged. We're asked more questions as a consumer. We're surrounded by design and creativity a lot more so. There's a lot more kind of brands like trying to grab our attention than here in Germany. I mean, there are some great brands here, but the way that they connect or try to connect with the consumer is much more about value. And yeah, it has a totally different tone. It's not as exciting, and they want to be a lot safer in their communication. And sometimes when they do something a little bit crazy, it can be a bit cringe, to be honest. So
if not culturally land as well. I mean, for me, a really interesting thing is we've done some work with some of the big consultancies, and you're sort of picking imagery for presentations for them. And in South Africa, you don't, like, old white men just don't appear on slides. Like, you just, it's like a secret forbidden piece of language in South African culture. Like, you just don't put people like that. Like a gray white man would just never appear on a slide. And in Germany, they're like, we need like the serious professional dude, like probably maybe a guy with gray hair. Like, so for them, that is like a mark of success and culture. And for here, it's a reminder of a past history that people just want to, like, brands and companies just want to kind of avoid. So it's the same image, but the sort of the meaning and the impact and the way it would land on an audience is completely different because the context has shifted, which is, still quite interesting to me, because a lot of the stuff I find is fed to us over the internet is very globalized or very skewed towards the US and the kind of UK aesthetics and kind of cultural norms. So you get fed a lot of that stuff. But I find it fascinating that there are these different pockets of culture that exist. And, you're talking about a bigger German kind of culture, but even, we're going to talk about sort of subcultures in a minute, but these things, the same thought exists when you kind of delve into like a more localized thing that's happening.
I mean, I did a stint for a couple of years where I was head of design for Deutsche Bahn. So I helped build the innovation team there, where we were building new products and testing products, and we built a really interesting, diverse team. And also English was one of the kind of shop floor languages, which was really cool. And I always remember them saying that we build infrastructure for Germany. And I really wanted to challenge that, because I didn't believe that we were making infrastructure for Germany. We were making infrastructure for people moving inside of Germany. And that's a completely different context. And they actually got behind that. And that was one of the kind of motivations then for the products that we were building, because it meant that what we were creating was like a vehicle. It was a stage. It was like an inclusive perspective on what we were doing, which was joining networks of the world once they are actually moving inside of Germany, and not just having this perspective that everyone gets on the train as soon as they enter the German borders become German. It's such a subtle thing, but these are a lot of the things that I suppose here I think it's really important to challenge as well, because it helps us to advance the storytelling and the narrative of what we do here and how important of a role design can play.
I think it's also, I guess what you're sharing is this idea of actually making what might be assumed to be fairly obvious, to say like you talking about it like this, but I think we should talk about it like that. And the implications of that then become much clearer, because, I think when you're working in a culturally homogenous place, a lot of that stuff is assumed because it's part of the kind of culture. But when you mix cultures, suddenly a lot of those human things that we assume are common are actually not common. Like, people think about things completely differently. But the process of going through that and almost spending the time and energy sort of articulating it can be exceedingly valuable, because, like you say, it can change the context, and the context will change what we produce. Then we're not just copying everyone else who's doing the same thing. Our context is slightly different, so we have the ability to sort of build something that is slightly different and can stand out on its merit, as opposed to a kind of trying to sort of wrap it in something that might not be true.
Yeah, I feel like I'm forever the outsider by default. I suppose, some people might feel quite lonely with that kind of self-titled idea of themselves. But I think that, as I said before, it is a superpower. And I think anybody who feels isolated or feels like they don't kind of fit in is probably one of the best places to find your voice, and it's one of the most important ones because it challenges everything that's around you.
So how does this feed into, in our pre-call, we were talking about globalization versus localization. And like I said earlier, I'm seeing a sort of a desire in all levels of the market for people I think the global brands will continue. I think it's, people like a big name that feels familiar, a hotel chain that you just know what you're going to kind of get. But there is definitely a growing desire for things that are unique. So when I'm in Germany, I want like a German, like something that feels German, and even on a smaller level, something that feels like it's from Frankfurt or from Hamburg, or, I want something that feels kind of regular, because I've shopped on a high street in London, I've shopped on a high street in New York, I've shopped on a high street in the US, and all of the shops are kind of the same, and the experience is kind of the same, and now the prices are all kind of the same. And it's lost that kind of interest of, I have no idea what to expect when I step into this brand, into this experience. How are you seeing that playing out in your work?
I think there's definitely an opportunity to niche down, to be hyper-localized as well. So I think there's a real opportunity there to talk directly to the people that are connected to the brands that you're building like never before as well. I think there's a way for you to be able to find your niche as well, to find your people, to find your tribe, to find your group much quicker. I'm a big believer of brands being a safe place, a safe space. I think over the years, brands have got a bad rep for being evil, because we often in the media will look at these big conglomerates, these big companies who are just there to make money and to manipulate people. But brands have the power to be able to bring community together and I believe to change the world as well. And with so many options and so many products and so many kind of niche spaces, I think brand can play such a huge role in making, those pockets feel like they can have, or pockets of ideas or diversity or thoughts, to actually have a voice and have their own space. I don't think that was really possible before to the extent that is today.
So how do you, if you were a company wanting to use this idea, like how would you advise someone to go about hyper-localizing, to start having those conversations? Because we have lots of clients who talk about, they want to build community, but they really survive longer than 1 or 2 product cycles. Those kind of conversations. How do people actually go about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, you need to listen. I mean, that's one of the most important things. You need to be, I talked about home. I think you need to be that safe place where you're able to open up conversation. You're able to bring people in. We just almost did a project, and it was for a football team. And so I'm not really into football myself, but we're asked to do the rebranding for like quite a famous football club here. The only way that I knew that I could understand what we were supposed to do was to actually be part of that culture. And being coming from a completely different world, how do I get in there? And I want to be, I think for our roles as creatives in these positions, we have to be the observers. We have to listen. We can't, I think we can guide once we have the information, but it's a lot about bringing people together to help make those decisions that you possibly can't on your own, and to be, a vehicle and a supporter of that. So in this particular case, we contacted some of the like hardcore football fans, and we just went along with them, and we documented it, we videoed it, and we just let them take us and tell us and understand what it is, what the passion is, and how they speak, the language that they are kind of written for themselves as a code, and to try and kind of understand and hear that. I think that's where you find soul and you find the real stories. It's quite simple. It's listening and talking to the people who know more than you and being open for that. I think that's really, really important. I think brands too often can try to dictate and say how things should be. We can build culture. Culture has to be built from within. And we can't say we're going to do something and this is going to be the outcome. I think you can, use strategy, and you can also use certain metrics to gauge where something's going. But one of the most important things is to get into the minds or with the people of the conversation of the brands that you're building.
It's interesting. As you were showing up, I bought my son, is Sebastian, he's 7. We were away in December for our summer holidays, and 2 of his friends just wore football jerseys the whole time. So we got back to Joburg, and he was like, "Please, can I have one?" So I'm like, okay, let's go to the shop and see. And he's got no association with any of the companies. So he's now standing in front of this wall of all of these jerseys, and he picks a local team called the Orlando Pirates. Yeah. And he picks them because their emblem is a skull and crossbones. And he's like, "Oh, I like that. I'll take that one." And I was like, "Well, my boy, you realize that you're buying into something that's quite important to a lot of people, and they're going to do it." And he was like, "Yeah, no, I don't think he understood anything I was saying," but he was like, "Cool." But now every time he wears the shirt, like, people come up to him in the street and they are like Buccaneers. Like, they are like, "Oh, I support you." And they are so happy to see him in this. Or they're from Chiefs, which is the opposing team in Johannesburg. And they're kind of like, "Why are you supporting the Buccaneers?" But there's this, he's now sort of taking a step into this world, and he's got this really positive association with his team now, because probably 15 people in the 8 or 9 times he's worn it have interacted with him because he is wearing that thing. Like, he's sort of accidentally gotten a little bit of it. Now he wants to go to the match. Now he wants to kind of see this thing. So this is like the next step of him kind of becoming part of this world that he in the beginning understood absolutely nothing about. But it started with him seeing like a little symbol that he kind of liked. He was like, "That's pretty cool. I'll take that," which I find fascinating. So I mean, you say brands should be a safe space, and that they should be kind of listening. How do you, I find this interesting, because some brands lead themselves to be like in the culture quite easily. Like sports is a really simple kind of example of something that can be in the culture. And then there's obviously like, streetwear or anything like that would kind of work. How do you see that same logic applying in different industries? Like, how do people sort of show up when they're working in a slightly less obvious, like, direct way?
You mean, how do you find culture within?
How do they step into something when they're not necessarily like cool or in the right industry? Or like, how do you, if you're a shampoo brand, like in a meaningful and interesting way? Because it's not necessarily something people are actively inviting into their world. They're not going, I really want to absorb this stuff. And I've seen some examples of people who've done really interesting things outside of, kind of these worlds.
Well, worlds is actually a good starting point. I think building narrative and building compelling stories it's always been important, but I think it's incredibly important today to actually create value and a space that you want to spend time with and within. I think when you're building or looking for these moments, it's often already there, and often it's laying in plain sight, but there's a lot of noise in front of it, especially with more corporate companies. And they just have to it's one of our jobs is to help them find that and find that special moment or that word or that claim or that value that holds dear to them, that also sets them apart from everything else. I think you're going to struggle with genericness, but even with genericness, you can often find something really cool as well. I remember, actually, it's a bit of an offshoot from what we're saying, but it's kind of connected. Sometimes I read stories to my daughter using ChatGPT. So I make up worlds and ask her who's going to be in them. And it's really cool, like some of the stories and adventures that we go on. It's like the old Choose Your Own Adventure books from back in the day. And sometimes when she's in a grumpy mood, I'll say, who do you want to be in the story today? And she'll say, nothing. And who would you want, where do you want this to take place? And she'll say, nowhere. And I'm like, all right, then, okay. So we're going to make a story about nothing and nowhere. And she goes, I suppose so. So I make up a story. I asked ChatGPT to make up a story. And we read this fantastical story about nothing and no one. And I think that's also wonderful. And that also makes you realize that out of genericness and a space where you think there is nothing, you can find something. You can find something that's engaging and rich and different. So often I feel like these stories are in plain sight, but we just need to find a way to be able to get them and then use those and make stories and worlds compelling around that.
That's interesting. I mean, one of the pillars we always try and look at is to entertain. Like, I think that is one of the jobs of a brand, is to be entertaining, and that is different for every audience. Like what's entertaining for a skate brand is very different to what's entertaining for a German bank. But you still can entertain. You still can entertain people. I mean, I remember this Virgin Money launched in South Africa years ago, and they actually targeted like a band of 20-something-year-olds that didn't have credit cards.
Yeah.
So they were kind of, the older banks were like, these guys are like on the edge of being sort of credit worthy, so we're not going to give them that. So they were like, that's our little kind of niche. And they were like, well, what do people want? Like, they want this idea, this prestige of getting a credit card. And the delivery of the credit card was in a red velvet box. And when you opened up the red velvet box, it was gold on the inside with your black card like sitting in the middle. And it worked so well because what would happen is one guy in an office would receive his Virgin credit card and like open it up, and it would be this like entertaining moment of greatness. And they were super excited about it. And then over the next couple of weeks, you'd see a couple of other red boxes start to like arrive in the office because other people saw this thing and they were like, oh, like I kind of want that experience myself. So I think there are spaces that people can kind of operate in that are entertaining. And, I think by entertaining someone, you can stand out in their brain, because so many, I almost think that in the functional spaces and the boring spaces is a lot more opportunity. So to be a football team that stands out is hard, because you're competing against like everyone. Whereas to be the I don't know, foot sanding tool that stands out is much easier because nobody is trying in that space. It's a much easier space to play in.
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, I think both of them equally have the opportunity. I think, for us to have curiosity as well when we go into these projects and not to self-filter. I think that's also can be quite damaging, that people are not brave enough or have the courage to actually try and tell those stories, even in in a room or in a boardroom or around a table, because they might be kind of shunned away at the idea. I think, especially for us, that's something that we have always tried to do, is really create a safe space where the crazy and the outrageous come to the table, and that we don't self-filter ourselves. We let other people do that at some point, because as you say, like what we do should be entertaining. And then whenever we present to a client, I always say to them, so we're going to show you some work. And what I want you to do now is just sit back, relax. We like to call this the popcorn moment. And let me entertain you. Let me entertain you for a little bit. And the clients absolutely love it. And I think, building narratives and the way that you deliver and the things that you show is so important to the whole process.
So I know you are very interested in subcultures. You mentioned that you're a skater. And on our pre-call, we were talking about sort of how Nike has sort of fallen in the graces sort of globally as a brand. Yeah. And it's an interesting one because they have been the gold standard for a long time. And I don't want to sit here and sort of speak ill of Nike, but I'm very interested, from your space in this. How do you see brands doing really well, especially smaller brands coming up against these like global established sort of juggernauts? How do you see that playing out in the market?
Well, you see this happening a lot already. And I think when we talked to you as well, we coined the phrase here, the skatification of brands. And I think it's like a return back to the roots where it's about independent perspectives. I mean, this is one of the things that I inadvertently fell in love with branding through skateboarding and not even realized it. And this is why I sometimes refer to as home and as a safe place. Is, back in the day, it was skateboarders making skate brands for skaters and fucking the institution, and saying, the big corporate saying, you're not having a piece of this, we own this, and I think it was a very cool, punk, rebellious time. And, over the years, like that also got somewhat filtered and diluted down as bigger companies bought a lot of these smaller brands and it disappeared. But the impact on culture is huge. You still see smaller drops of clothing labels. Still, even today, you'll still maybe get queues of people or special signups to try and get hold of certain things, creating this kind of scarcity value. And, a lot of this is rooted back in that culture. And it's about kind of just using what you have and making do. Like the problem with like Nike is it took its finger off the pulse somewhat. And I believe, it puts so much money into the production value of things, and also like the way it shows up. It almost like crowbars its way into every culture. It tries really, really hard. And that try hard, we are so savvy to that these days. You see these more subcultural brands, like we talked about running being a perfect example of that. You have all these new running brands coming up who, what's the difference between running? It's like people get up and run, right? But there's so many things in between that. There's so many expressions of that from, running brands connecting with the hardcore scene, with more like a hip hop scene, or the after dark movement as well, where, they'll be looking at the safety of women running in the dark. So there's so many different versions of that. And it's about talking to community, brands being community-based, supporting them, and also telling those stories and not needing to have huge budgets to do so. It's about having those conversations within amongst the people and relaying that and spreading that message as well. I think that's where you're able to have a lot more impact. And this is where Nike were not able to do that. They're trying really hard to crawl back or to come back. I see this a lot in the sneaker scene as well, but they've got a long way to go. They really kind of, just became complacent with their dominance. And now is the time, if you want to be if you're a small company with big ideas, if you've got a mobile phone and, you've got a connection to the internet and you've got a community, you can do anything.
I find it like exciting and fascinating because it is that. It's almost like you'll find brands that put you off because you're like, this is not for me. I'm not interested. But then you'll find another one that you're like, this is the best thing that I have personally kind of ever seen. And I think that is super interesting in those expressions. And then how do you expand it? Like once you find that small little seed and that little root and you find that community, like how do you start to sort of grow that out from there into other spaces? Because you can start very small and very niche and then it gives you the springboard to sort of carry that interest out to other people that are actually quite interested in the thing that you are sort of playing with, which is completely different to what everybody else is looking at.
It's crazy, right? Like, you could have a complete affinity to the local pizza shop because they have sick merch and they're just like, they're competing, they're like rocking the community. They're against the big players, the Pizza Huts, the Domino's, or whatever. And I'm just as proud to wear their T-shirt as I would be probably like your son wearing his football shirt, because it's a cause. It's this hyper-localized niche that we were talking about, where you feel proud to be part of something, even if it's very, very small, and you wear it very proudly on your body and say, look, this is who I am. It wasn't the case 10, 15 years ago. And I think that's super cool that we have that everyone has the same kind of level, like the same playing field, and they can level up to wherever they want to.
I'm interested. And I want to ask you, I'm aware of time, so I want to ask you like one more question. You sitting at this point, you're working globally, you come from the UK, you live in Germany. Where do you see this sort of hyper-localization thing going, like over the next 5-6 years? Where do you see this thing playing out as a wild hypothesis?
A wild hypothesis. Oh. I just see it becoming more and more widespread, and I hope it does. I really, really hope it does, because it takes us back to a time where individuality was key and self-expression was valued. And I found and shaped my own self through that. And I think it's incredibly valuable. I don't just want this kind of homogenized society where everybody looks the same and everybody does the same. I think we lost a lot of it, from how we consume music and the fast fashion that we can buy very easily these days. And I just believe that, these smaller pockets, these smaller expressions of story and brand are incredibly powerful for everybody, and it will help to shape culture again. I think it will get us back in the right direction, because if we don't, we will all just look the same. AI is doing a very good job doing that at the moment, and I hate it for that, even though AI does have a place in creativity. But I don't want it to dominate and kind of dictate everything. I was in the supermarket the other day, and it was lunchtime, and there must have been 16-year-old kids just came out of the school. There must have been, I don't know, maybe 8 of them, all like a crew, all in the supermarket. They all had exactly the same haircut. They all had exactly the same black jacket and the same blue jeans and the same white sneakers. And I don't want a world like that. Even though I'm not a teenager anymore, I just feel like this idea of everything being the same and big corporates being able to tell everybody how to do things, the small hyper-localized niche spaces and stories will help to challenge that. And I think it will make it a much more interesting place for us all to be.
That's a super great thought to end it. I feel like we're going to start a revolution here, Paul. We can burn it all down. Well, dude, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really enjoyed the conversation. I'm definitely going to take away thinking about how to sort of go back a little bit to something, because I think, part of this is all caught up in aspiration. It's like aspiring to be huge, but how do you turn that around a little bit? And I think that's a refreshing idea to think about it. And I'm hopefully going to do a GBT story with Sebastian tonight and see where the story takes us.
It's funny, it's wicked.
So thank you for coming on the podcast, and we'll catch all of you in the next one. Bye-bye.